Hey, what's up guys? Nick the Informative Fisherman, and welcome to the top 3 worm rigs for when, where, and why. That's the Texas rig, the Wacky worm, and the drop shot. I see people doing them under the wrong conditions from time to time. There is no real wrong way to do it, but there's a more preferred way to do it. So let's break these 3 down, when, where, and why, and show some variations, some more advanced outlooks on these rigs and how you can change things up a little to get a few more bites throughout that day. So let's start off with the Texas rig. Now for a Texas rig worm, it's basically hooking a worm weedless. That's either with a EWG, an extra wide gap, or a worm hook variation of a wide gap, or a straight shank flipping hook. Now if you don't know how to rig that, I'll go ahead and show you right here. We're strictly going to go through the nose of the worm, in like so, and we're going to tilt it out, and we're going to slide that up. This one has a little keeper on it. You're going to slide the head of that worm up over the keeper, and you always want to rig the worm straight. So you're going to see exactly where the worm's sitting straight, and you want to pinch your fingers right there and visualize the worm. Stick that hook in. Now you can go all the way through, okay, and you can pull the worm back up and stick the point on it like so to make it weedless. Or you have a variation, you can leave that hook point out to where it can easily slide up and down against it, and that's your Texpose version. This is much easier for a fish to grab and get hooked, but it's not nearly as weedless as having the hook point back into the worm. And now we're going to do it on a flipping hook. Now the standard size hooks that are very common with a Senko style bait, the 2 worms I'm going to be showing off today are primarily any Senko style bait. This is roughly 5 3/4 to 6 inch style bait, and we're also going to show the Zoom trick worm. These are 2 of the very most common popular worms. Now this is a flipping hook. This happens to be a 3/0 flipping hook, and instead of just sticking it straight in like I do the EWG, I like to come through at an angle. It's basically right across the tip of the worm and out the side of the worm, like so. And the reason why, this is a flipping hook, it's not designed to fit inside the worm perfectly. So now I'm going to rotate it down, and I'm going to put it on the keeper, okay? Now you can see this hook point right here. Where's the hook point come in? Right in the side of that worm. So you got to get it just like so. Now, the reason why you didn't see me go through all the way with the hook on this, if a fish grabs this hook point is pointed out the side. It'll penetrate extremely easy and deep into the fish when they grab it. This is a more compact flipping version of that EWG. Now, why would I use a straight shake flipping hook versus an offset hook for the Texas rig? It's very simple. This is a higher hookup ratio, but this also destroys more worms throughout the day. If I'm dragging across the bottom or down in grass, I'm probably going to throw this EWG and drag it. If I feel them bump it, I'm going to reel down. I'm going to make sure they have it. Now with a flipping hook, I'm flipping into heavy cover, into branches and everything, and when I feel that tick, I'm going to rip them immediately. The flipping straight shank hook has a lot more power and a higher hookup ratio for as soon as you feel them bite it, setting the hook. If you set the hook right away with an EWG, your hookup ratio is not quite as high. So if I'm focusing on flipping into heavy cover or structure, I'm going to put it on a flipping hook. If I'm throwing it out into grass or loose structure, loose cover, here and there branches, but I'm mostly throwing out to grass or little drop-offs, I'm going to throw it on an EWG. If I'm fishing 5 feet or less and there's really like less than 5 mile-an-hour wind, I'm going to fish it weightless, no weight up front. Okay, and the reason for that is it's going to fall slower. It's going to sit more natural on the grass. Cleaner, calmer conditions, you need to be more subtle and more finesse. That means less weight, less terminal tackle, smaller hooks. All right, and that's less than 5 feet deep. If I'm fishing 5 feet and beyond, I'm going to start adding a bullet weight, and that just slides on the line and meets the head of that Texas rig. Now, oftentimes you're going to see guys with a bobber stop. That's that little rubber piece that slides on your line right here, which keeps your weight in place. Okay, it keeps it from sliding up the line. Now, there's pros and cons to that, all right? If you're flipping into trees or if you're trying to penetrate grass, you need a bobber stop to where your weight doesn't slide away. If you're casting just into grass, deeper grass, and you do have a bobber stop, slide it up on there. Because every now and then when you make that cast, your weight will slide and it'll pull that worm down into the grass, but it won't jam your worm down into the grass. Your worm will kind of just sit there on top of the grass to where you'll have a higher hookup ratio by letting that weight slide. But if you're trying to penetrate the grass, and this is like in the later summer months when the sun, the UV is really intense, you want to put that bobber stop on and you want that worm to penetrate the grass. The bass are going to be down in it. But in the spring, in the fall, when the sun's less intense and the fish are more willing to chase, having it pegged is not nearly as good as having it slide back and forth. So in the fall, overcast days, early in the morning, later in the evening, the sun is less intense, allow that weight to slide. If you want to have a bobber stop on there for later on when the sun comes up in the afternoon, just slide your bobber stop a couple feet up the line and your hookup ratios will be higher. So in regards to all these rigs, and especially the Texas rig, for the most part, I'm fishing these on post-frontal days, a day after a storm that's calm, the sun comes out, or I'm fishing them on calm bluebird sky days, or the water's really clear and there's no wind. Basically tough conditions. All the worm rigs, all three of these rigs excel in tough conditions. But the Texas rig, I'm primarily focused on getting the Texas rig to the bottom or in and out of heavy cover and structure. Branches, big grass piles, I'm getting it down in there. This is the times when the fish are much less willing to chase. In the summertime when that water gets hot, a Texas rig is huge. They're down in the shade of a boulder. You can put that bullet weight on there, leave it loose, let it get down in there in the shade and drag it across the bottom, and you want it Texas rig to where you don't snag those rocks. Or if you're flipping into mats and matted bushes and matted vegetation through plants, something with a lot of shade over their head, that Texas rig is also very valuable. So when I'm using the Texas rig, I'm in and around heavy cover or structure, I'm trying to penetrate grass, or I'm dragging it on the bottom.
Hang with us, guys. We'll be right back. Oh, you heard they got weapons of big fish destruction? Well, you heard right. BWA Fishing Performance is the newest company hitting the U.S. market by storm. With some of the sickest swim baits around and non-cookie cutter style lures that you could ever get your hands on, it's time to show these fish something new. Visit BWA.com. Hey guys, did you know that Yours Truly is now hosting Lucky Tackle Box's monthly panfish instructionals? And aside from relentless fish catching, I'll be breaking down the rigging and the gear you need to get going along the way. And of course, a few extra tips to help you score more fish on the goodies included in your box. So remember, the tug is our drug, so go visit LuckyTackleBox.com and get signed up today. Attention Northern California anglers, have you been to Boat Country in Escalon with one of the largest selections of welded aluminum fishing boats from North River, Hughes Craft, and now Crestliner? Chances are they have the right boat for you. And did I mention they have a full service center to take care of all your repair or boating maintenance needs? If you're a boat owner or just looking to become one, you owe it to yourself to check these guys out. Visit BoatCountryUSA.com or stop on by. We'll see you there. Bigger, better, badder. The evolution of the buzzbait is upon us. The Evolution Baits Grass Burner is a high-performance bass snatcher machine. High-end components, inline displacement, larger profile, balanced body for fast or slower retrieves, better deflection, and oversized treble hooks. You wouldn't bring a slingshot to a gunfight, would you? Find out more at evolutionbaits.com. Did you know that P-Line makes specialized lines for all your fishing needs, from the super strong abrasive resistant CXX or the low stretch super stealthy CX Premium? Or maybe you're looking for invisibility or super bite detection with P-Line's 100% fluorocarbon. No matter what your needs, P-Line's got it covered. To find out more, visit P-Line.com.
P-Line, baby.
Ever tried pulling a planer board next to your boat when trolling or fishing from a swift current bank? If not, you're missing out on one of the most phenomenal fish catching machines on the market today. With Yellowbird planer boards pulling your lines perpendicular to your boat, you can't help but catch more fish. Find out more by visiting www.yellowbirdproducts.com.
So earlier I mentioned on my EWG, on like a 6-inch worm, I generally like to go with a 4-0. So if I'm down to a 4-inch worm, I'm probably going to fish on a 2-aught. On my flipping hook, I like a 4 for those 6-inch and up worms. If I'm throwing an 8-inch, I'll throw a 6-aught from sometimes. So 8-inch to 10-inch worm, 6-aught, 6-inch worm to 5-inch worm, I'm generally throwing a 4. For those 4-inch worms, I'm going down to a 3 or a 2/0. Now the thickness of these hooks, the diameter of these hooks are huge, because if you have a little light worm and you're fishing shallow, okay, you don't want it to drop down fast, so you don't really need a big heavy hook. You can use a thinner, a light wire diameter hook, okay? A light wire hook will naturally let that bait fall much slower if you're fishing it weightless, or throwing it on a spinning rod. You want a lighter diameter hook. Therefore, the hook point is thinner and sharper, and it doesn't take a lot of leverage to penetrate that hook. But if you want it to fall just slightly faster than let's say if you're throwing it on a light wire hook, you can fish like a 2X or a 4X strength EWG. And the 4X, 6X, when they're adding those X strengths to that, that's generally a thicker diameter hook. It's not necessarily that the hook's stronger, it's stronger because it's thicker, therefore the hook itself has more weight. So if you're trying to get it to fall a little bit faster without adding weight, you could fish a heavier diameter hook and get those same results of fishing it weedless and getting it to get down slightly deeper without putting a weight in front and driving that worm nose down. You can just kind of get it to hover down gentle. All right, guys, now for the Wacky rig. All right, the hooks I like to use are mosquito hooks. They're a little tiny, round bend hook. They look like a live bait hook. Now, sometimes I'll throw it without the weed guard, and sometimes I'll throw it with the weed guard. You just put that in there behind the hook point, and it protects it in heavy cover and loose grass. It'll kind of just hover down there without getting a bunch of grass on the hook point. But usually with a light wire hook, I'm not flipping this into heavy cover or structure. Now, when you rig a Texas rig worm, you want to look to see if there's a flat side of the worm. You see that right there? This is the flat side of the worm. So the flatter side of the worm is going to have more water resistance, to where the Wacky rig, you cast out and you let it fall straight down, and your worm's going to have natural undulating motion as it falls. So we want to rig it with that flat side facing down. So it's going to be really hard to see here. You always want to hook the worm right in the middle, but you're kind of going to go through the middle side of the worm, all right? And I'll show you this up close. Now when I cast out, the flat side of the worm is facing down, to where I'm going to get a lot more action. If the round side of the worm was facing down, I would receive less action. So I'm going to go ahead and put the weed guard behind there. And there you have a Wacky rig. Now, my Wacky rig hook on a trick worm, okay, it's a skinnier, more finesse worm. This is a size 1. Now, if I was to Wacky rig something like a Senko, I'm going to go up to a 2/0, okay? And the reason for that, this is a bigger, heavier worm. This is going to fall much faster. This is going to fall much slower. This is my more finesse days, to where if that water's even cleaner, I'm probably going to go to a thinner, more natural looking worm. If the water has a little bit more stain, I might go with a fatter worm. If I'm trying to get down a little bit deeper, I might go with a heavier worm that falls a little bit faster. But they do have weighted Wacky rig hooks if that's what you want to do. But the same thing with the Senko. You know, you hook it right in the middle. They're perfectly round, and it has a lot of that natural undulating motion as it falls down. The reason why I'm going with a bigger hook is it's a bigger bait. You know, you don't want to use a big giant hook on a little tiny finesse bait. Therefore, it's drawing the fish's attention to that hook. Now, with that being said, if the water is gin clear and it's slick calm, sometimes you might want to use that little tiny hook on that bigger, heavier worm. If it's crystal clear and slick calm, the fish can see very well. This is where you want to be more finesse, lighter lines, smaller hooks on that Wacky rig. So when do you throw a Wacky worm versus a Texas rig or a drop shot? Well, sometimes you get out there early in the morning and you're throwing a top water, you're throwing a jig, you're throwing a spinner bait, and it's just not happening. Or that water's still really clear and it's still really calm that morning, and you can't get them on a reaction bait. The good part is, if bass are roaming and willing to chase, and just with that being said, you have spring and fall bass are always willing to roam and chase bait. So you're gonna find me oftentimes throwing the Wacky rig in the spring. Even though the sun could come out, it could be clear, calm, the sun can come out, those fish are much willing to run after a bait. A Wacky rig can be hugely beneficial at those times. And let's say it's post-frontal, you come out and you just don't get them that morning chasing reaction baits, it's also a perfect time to throw a Wacky rig. If fish are suspended, the post-spawn in the winter time, sometimes they'll pull out off the bank, they'll be out over 50 foot of water and they'll be sitting 30 feet deep. And you see them on your graph and you're throwing spoons, you're doing everything, you cast it out there, open your spool up and let that thing fall and undulate through them. Cody Meyer just broke the world record spotted bass doing that exact same thing with a Wacky rig. I think he was probably counting down 4 or 5 minutes on the fall with his spool open before that giant spotted bass grabbed that. These are also huge up next to vertical walls. If you have a steep wall, cast it up there, leave your spool open, it'll kind of just undulate and fall down that wall. Bridge pilings, you pull up to a bridge piling, pitch it up, hit that bridge piling, leave the spool open, let it fall. I've caught tons of fish doing that with Mark Lassane and Travis Moran. Very common, popular technique. Now, when do you throw the drop shot? I have the power shot here and a regular drop shot here. What's the difference? A regular drop shot has that same type of Wacky rig hook, that little mosquito hook right there. Smaller the worm, smaller the hook. Tougher the pressure, cleaner the water, smaller the hook. If I'm fishing in heavy cover, deep grass, a little bit more dingy, I might go with a bigger worm, but I'm also using a small 1 or 2/0 EWG hook at that point to get it into that thicker cover, into those branches, into that timber, next to boat docks, the pilings on the corner, you know, the stumps. If I'm fishing in and around stumps and I see a fish sitting there, the power shot can be huge. I'm using a little bit heavier line, 12 to 15 pound line versus my standard drop shot. I'm using 6, 8, sometimes 10. Now, when does a drop shot excel? Deep, deep water. Drop shots are huge. Clear water. Drop shots are huge. Wintertime, the drop shot is huge. When a fish is on an isolated spot next to something that you can't cast and drag something past without being in the strike zone for very long, you can cast a drop shot in there with a nosed hook worm. A nosed hook worm, and you can dance that in place. Dance it in place in front of that fish without dragging it out of the strike zone. Now, I like to throw the drop shot. In the spring, I will throw it in the pre-spawn, but my dropper weight is going to be about 3 to 4 inches high off the bottom. And the reason why that is, late winter, early spring, the fish are more associated to the bottom. You want to be right in front of their face on the bottom. In the summertime, sometimes I'll run at 15, 20 inches. They sit deep on boulders in the summertime. I want a longer dropper to where they're down there next to those boulders, and I'm just going to drag it and let that come over the rocks, and that'll kind of just follow the contour of the rocks as that weight drags in and out. Now, in the fall, you can use these, but I'm usually covering water a little bit faster in the fall, and the fish are a lot more willing to chase and run and hit the surface in the fall. So I like the drop shot in the spring, the summer, and the winter. The fall's really not too common for me. Once they start getting really, really active and chasing lures in the spring, I'm not going to use a drop shot right away if it's a post-frontal day or I'm having a tough time getting bit. I'm probably going to throw that Wacky rig. Now, the same thing applies here. You can use a bigger worm. I would suggest using the bigger worm on that power shot setup. With heavier line EWG, you can rig a Texas rig, bigger worm like that. If you have dingy water, all right, you can rig that bigger worm on there. You could put a 4/0 on there. You just want to use a heavier drop shot weight. The lighter the worm, the lighter the weight. If you're able to make bottom contact with a lighter weight, it's going to be more finesse. Just do not lift that weight up off the bottom. Tight line, slack line, tight line, slack line. Don't bounce your weight. One of my other favorite times to throw a drop shot is if I get out and I'm fishing an area and it's below 20 feet deep. I don't feel like dragging a Texas rig. I don't want to wait for my Wacky rig to get down there. A drop shot can be huge. Or if I look at my fish finder, okay, and I see island tops, it's the summertime, it's the winter time, fish are out from those main lake points, and there's like a little hump under the water that could be 40, 50. I've caught fish at 70 feet deep on a drop shot lots of times. So don't be afraid to get out there, look at your fish finder, and look at a submerged island on Navionics app or any topographical map, and drop the drop shot down there on them. Just remember in the wintertime that hook's going to be down a little bit closer to that weight. Now, another great place, ledges. If you see a point going out into the lake and you're graphing it on your fish finder, and you see it goes from, you know, 15 feet to 35 feet, a drop shot is great to bring over that ledge. Drag it down. As soon as you feel it drop off, open your spool up on your spinning rod and let it fall down that ledge, and you can just drag it back. When you're fishing deep, you really don't need to do this with your rod. Sometimes just keeping it in place and slowly moving on your reel works. I usually don't even reel with a drop shot. I drag it back. I put my rod at 12 o'clock. The higher your rod point is up, the more sensitivity you have. Once I get to here, I reel down and I drag it again with my rod. It allows you to feel everything that weight is making contact with on the bottom. So deep times, I love to fish the drop shot. If I see fish on a bed, of course I'll shorten that drop shot up and keep it right in place. A drop shot is huge for bed fishing with some sort of white worm on there or some little white creature bait. Those are your three most popular worm rig guys. Hopefully you got a much better understanding from that. The two most popular worms of all time is a Yamamoto Senko. There's a million variations out there, and a Zoom trick worm. There's a million variations out there for that too. Two of the most popular colors you can fish in regards to those baits are green pumpkin or black and red. If you can get a fish to eat black and red, it's going to tend to be a larger fish. Green pumpkin is always the most popular color countrywide in the US. You will see that green pumpkin's the #1 carried color. The black and red, they tend to think it's something with higher protein. You'll get less bites on black and red, but bigger. Green pumpkin or watermelon red flake. And sometimes when that water gets super clear, a variation I like to throw is a brown. One thing I forgot to add there, a shad color worm is always huge too. Along with the other colors I mentioned there for you, you always want to have a shad presentation. I got the Senko style shad one right here. They have shad variations of the little skinny worms. Zoom trick worm has a shad variation. A really good way to do that too on that drop shot thing I forgot to mention to you there. I know I just rigged that backwards. That's on purpose. Is Wacky rigging on a drop shot sometimes is even better than a nose hook, especially in the spring. A Wacky rig on a drop shot is hugely effective. Now, one thing I want to add on a lighter color bait, the black and red, this really doesn't apply too much. You could take something like a chartreuse dye or a marker, and you can highlight just the ends, and I'll show you up close. You can highlight just the ends of these lighter color worms. What that's going to do, this is just spike it right here. This is the garlic scent. It emphasizes the action. Bass love chartreuse. As that's falling, the movement on the tip of that is going to emphasize the action. One other thing a lot of guys like to do is where that hook is penetrating the bait, they also like to put chartreuse right there sometimes as a focal point. Chartreuse does show up on green pumpkin, but you want to put a couple of coats. Put a coat on there, let it dry, and add another coat. For drop shot, I really like robo worms, skinny worms. In the clearer the water, I like to throw that purple sometimes, and I like to throw brown and green pumpkin. Hopefully all this information helped you guys out. Make sure to check out informativefisherman.com. Hit us up on Facebook and Instagram, guys. Appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time.